Greg, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. And
My pleasure.
we'll start with this. Mississippi State fans are looking at this game as, we were better than Memphis last year. We should beat them this year. What about this Memphis team is the same from the one that beat Mississippi State a year ago, and what is different about them?
Well, first of all, let me say that that's the attitude that they should have. Mississippi State playing at home. Obviously, last year was disappointing, so they should have that attitude. But Memphis has that kind of free attitude to go down to Starkville and just let the chips fall where they may and see what happens. I don't think it's as big a game for Memphis as it probably is for Mississippi State, although neither game is a conference game, but because of what happened last year. But as far as how different Memphis is, you're talking about a new offensive coordinator. You're talking about a new defensive coordinator. They lose some of their star offensive players in Calvin Austin, who's moved on to the NFL, and in their tight end Sean Dykes. But a lot of the other positions are pretty much the same. The running backs, that same group, although they bring in a guy who was the MAC Freshman of the Year in Javian Ducker, so he joins the group that'll run the ball. And they got some new receivers as well. But on defense, you're talking about a new format and a 4-3 front as opposed to a 3-4 with Matt Barnes, their new defensive coordinator, comes from Ohio State. So although the major position, the most important position, the quarterback position, Seth Hennigan, is back and did a great job last year as a true freshman, a lot of other areas are different for this Memphis team this upcoming 2022 season.
Greg Gaston joins us right now. He's with Sports 56 in Memphis and also does sidelines for the Memphis Radio Network. So with the new offensive coordinator, does that mean new system? And if so, has there been any indications of what that's going to be? There's been a trend so far where coaches are even more unwilling to reveal anything than they've ever been before. I mean, Timmy Chang basically made Vanderbilt guess at literally everything before the game. Is Memphis going to do the same thing to Mississippi State, or is it a lot of similar stuff, just a new guy calling the plays?
I think it's going to be very similar, but you're absolutely right on in this day and age. I know it at least happens in Memphis where things are a lot more secretive than they used to be, and I've covered sports since 1985, and I remember having basically free time to watch every practice from start to finish and observe whatever I want. And now it's you get in, they get you out of there after a few early periods. They want to keep things secret. But I do believe from everything that Ryan Silverfield has said, their head coach, and what Tim Cramsey has said, he's the new offensive coordinator, comes from Marshall, that things are going to be similar to what we saw last year. And that's similar to what Tim ran with his Marshall offense, which was a very productive offense. Now, before that, he was at Sam Houston State, and they put up some phenomenal numbers in one double leg. But Sam Houston State and Marshall and the way they ran the offense are two different things. I think Memphis and Marshall will be very similar as far as their offenses are concerned.
What do we need to know about Seth Hennigan? You mentioned the star of last year's game anyways, off to the NFL, but the Memphis quarterback coming into Starkville, what do we need to know about him?
He's put on about 15, 20 pounds, most of it muscle, so he's a bigger guy that hopefully can be able to sustain a hit or two. I think last year he proved that he could, but late in the season he did miss a game at UCF because he did get hit pretty well. I thought the offensive line did a pretty good job in protecting him, but they lose a star like Dylan Parham, who went early to the Raiders in the NFL draft. So that's going to be key is keeping him upright. But in talking to him and having him on my show, I mean, he talked about being nervous last year as a freshman, nervous about tucking the ball and running with it. But he ended up having to do it, and he did more of it later in the year. He is not what you would call the multidimensional quarterback. He's not one of those guys that's going to try to beat you with his legs. He will run when he has to. And now he feels a little bit more confident in running with the football if need be. But don't get me wrong, this guy is a pure pocket passer.
You mentioned a four-down front for Memphis's defense. One of the keys to stopping Mississippi State is being able to get home with as few rushers as possible, mostly, if you can, just only sending three guys, dropping a bunch back in like a zone coverage and just keeping everything underneath. Can Memphis get home, in your opinion, bringing 3 or 4 guys and just that? Or do you think they might have to create some pressure, which can open up some things in the back end for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, that'll be awfully tough to do it. Obviously, last year was a 3-man front. They're going to run the 4-man front. Doesn't mean that they'll always necessarily rush 4 or more. They could rush 3, drop 8 back into coverage, depending on the situation. I know there's a new left tackle for Mississippi State, which is key to replace Will Rogers. But to answer your question, I think it's extremely hard to do so. So you're going to see some blitzes. I think you're going to see guys coming off the edge that are very athletic. But it will be a challenge against that State offensive line to be able to get to Rogers. If they can do that, if they can get there, as you said, rushing less players, that's an advantage for Memphis if they can get to Rogers early on and maybe even sack him. But that's easier said than done. But I like what Matt Barnes has done with this defense. They lost some players, but they also brought in some guys from the portal that will be key players, and I like what he's done so far with this defense.
Greg Gaston of Sports 56 in Memphis on your radio right now. Is there a little extra spice from Memphis players because of who it is? I mean, I imagine they'd be getting up for any SEC game, but Memphis's left tackle, for example, is a Mississippi guy. Was I think committed to Ole Miss, but that got weird late, and Mississippi State obviously did not sign him either. But is there a little bit extra juice because it's guys that are from around here? Yes, it's an SEC team, they get up, but this one in particular being from Mississippi where they're so close and some of which are from?
Oh, there's no question. Guys that are local and they're from the Mississippi area, I'm sure that there's that extra little giddy up in their step to try to knock off a Mississippi State team for a second straight year. But I think for any player, even players that aren't from the area, that have elected to play at Memphis, and some, especially some, and there's not a ton of those guys, but there's certainly guys that were looked at by, whether it be Mississippi SEC schools or other SEC schools, at least maybe got a look as far as recruiting is concerned. I mean, they certainly want to knock off that SEC team, no matter what team they're playing, whatever team's in front of them, if they have the SEC connection, and that's a huge feather in their cap if they can get the win. But I don't think they're going as far as thinking that they lose this game, their season's in peril. It's not a conference game, as I talked about earlier, as you know. It's not a conference game for Mississippi State. This is more of a game for Memphis to go in there, to be competitive, let the chips fall where they may, and then hopefully come out of there. You know, if they get an upset win, that's fantastic. I mean, again, that would be a great start to the season like it was last year. If they don't, as long as they're competitive, as long as they come out of there healthy, they got to turn around and play a Navy team, which is a complete 180 as far as their offense is concerned with a triple option offense. And that's more of their concern, is to be competitive in the conference. But I think the chip on the shoulder situation with those players, I think you're right on about that. I think it's for any time that Memphis plays an SEC opponent.
Got about a minute and a half left here. Fans around here would roll their eyes when I say this, but Memphis' schedule for a G5 schedule was quite difficult last year. I mean, UTSA ended up being really, really good. They had to go to UCF. SMU ended up being good. Houston was really, really good. It felt like, though, after that Mississippi State win, that was the kind of thing where you thought, okay, well, Memphis has a path now to win out. If they can beat an SEC team, they might, find their way into an Access Bowl, and it just didn't work out that way.
Mm-hmm.
Why not, or how not? And do you think these sweeping changes that have happened in terms of coaching and staff members and stuff like that are to Memphis's benefit?
Yeah, look, first of all, you're spot on. After that win against Mississippi State, you felt really good where you were. They want to shoot out up at Arkansas State, but that's a border rival. There are always those wacky games against them. The UTSA game, they were in total control. They were up 3 touchdowns at halftime, and it was a complete turnaround in the second half. Nobody really can put their finger on what happened in that second half, but to me, it was UTSA got really physical with their offensive line, which was tremendous in their running game, and they started to pound the Tigers, and the Tigers took a step back. And then from that game on, they had great opportunities. Tigers could have won 9 games last year. They blew a couple of those games with special teams. In the Tulsa situation, they should have won at UCF, and that was with a backup quarterback. That was one that Hennigan did not play. They absolutely blew a game in Philadelphia against Temple, in which they put a couple of balls deep in the red zone on the ground, turnovers, and a concussion to their starting running back, Brandon Thomas, who will be back again this year as the number one RB on the depth chart. So, yeah, your assessment's right on. It was a disappointment, to say the least, the way the season ended up going. But in the end, still bowl eligible. They ended up not playing that bowl, as you probably know, in Hawaii, and that was sad for those players. Not sad to go to Hawaii, but